Hi, my name is Dr. Laura Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College in Bayside, New York. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of unbridled prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's event is entitled The Poetry of Psychological Resistance at Auschwitz, the words of Kristina Zawulska. This event is part of the KHC's 2020-21 National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Internment and Resistance, Confronting Mass Detention and Dehumanization. Today's moderator is Dr. Stephen Dahlke, one of this year's NEH faculty fellows. Dr. Dahlke received his DMA from the University of Southern California, is Associate Professor of Music at Queensborough Community College, and conducts research on effective education. He has published in the American Chorals Directors Association's Choral Journal and ChorTeach. Dr. Dahlke is also a former NEH Fellow at the KHC for a multidisciplinary project on student testimony about oppression and genocide. He has sung with the Oregon Symphony Orchestra, the Seattle Symphony Pops, Portland Youth Philharmonic, Portland Baroque Orchestra, Portland Opera Players, Oregon Repertory Singers, and the Aspen Music Festival. I'd like to now turn it over to Dr. Dahlke, who will introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Barbara Milewski. Dr. Dahlke?
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. It's wonderful, everyone, to be here today. It's wonderful to gather together to talk about issues that are so important to us as individuals and to us as a species of beings. I want to welcome Dr. Barbara Milewski to join us today. Dr. Milewski's work specializes in shining a light on certain psychological aspects of music, with an emphasis on music and the nation of Poland, music examining the effects and aftermath of war, and music created in Nazi concentration camps. You can experience some of Dr. Milewski's work in the BBC podcast documentary, Songs from the Depths of Hell, and in an upcoming book, Songs to Remember, Musical Mementos from the Nazi Camps, to name only two. Dr. Milewski's work has been recognized by, among many others, the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, National Endowment for the Humanities, and Fulbright. Dr. Milewski comes to us today as Associate Professor of Music from Swarthmore College and having received her PhD from Princeton University. I can say that I am sure we are very grateful to have Barbara with us today to explore music's power to express deep, complex, and often shatteringly specific meaning. So welcome, Dr. Milewski, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen, for that very, very kind introduction. And I want to extend my heartfelt thanks also to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, Queensborough Community College, and all of the program organizers for inviting me to share my work today with you all. Of course, I'd love to be with you all in person, but it is really nice to see so many new faces over Zoom, changing it up a little bit. So thank you all for coming and for taking the time to be here today. So I'm going to now try to share my screen. Can everyone see everything? Great. Okay. For nearly 3 decades now, I've been researching and writing about the unofficial music making that took place among prisoners in the Nazi camps. Under the rubric Music of the Holocaust, most audiences are more readily aware of the art music created by professional composers in Theresienstadt, the model camp ghetto established by the Nazis for propagandistic purposes. My aim, however, is to recover and spotlight the work of ordinary prisoners who, at great peril, if not outright threat of death, contributed invaluably to preserving a degree of humanity and culture in a landscape that severely challenged both. In doing so, I hope to shed further light on the less straightforward histories of the Nazi camp universe that have often been overlooked by scholars. I also wish to demonstrate that the clandestine musical and poetic activities that took place in so many different Nazi camps represent a degree of cultural continuity during wartime, compelling us to reconsider more conventional conceptualizations of the Second World War as a moment of absolute historical rupture. As hard as it may be to comprehend, the camps were places where prisoners lived, where they daily had to confront not only punishing work details, savage hunger and illness, but also complex human choices, relationships, and death. Even Auschwitz-Birkenau, the most recognized place associated with the destruction of Europe's Jews, it is important to recall, functioned not only as a death camp, but also, and for longer still, as a concentration camp, housing tens of thousands of prisoners for more than 5 years. Today, I wish to share with you stories of friendship, trust, and even passion among Auschwitz prisoners who were not immediately slotted for extermination. They come to us by way of Krystyna Ziewulska and the record of her musical poetic activities. There we go. Krystyna Ziewulska is best known as the author of Przeżyłam Oświęcim, I Survived Auschwitz, her candid and moving account of life and death in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Published in Poland in 1946, Ziewulska's memoir represents one of the earliest and most significant contributions to Polish literature concerning the Holocaust. Less known, but no less important, are Ziewulska's songs and poetry created during her imprisonment there. Many of these works were collected by Alexander Kulishevich after the war and deposited at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum Archive in Washington, D.C. in the early 1990s. Some have been tucked away elsewhere in the archives of the Auschwitz Museum in Oświęcim, Poland, or in the homes of family members on both sides of the Atlantic. These remarkable works offer valuable insight into the daily experiences and cultural activities of prisoners in captivity, sensitively reflecting simple truths and an insider's perspective on camp events in the process of their unfolding. They are, in the essence of things, a valuable form of historical documentation. As importantly, perhaps more so, they also reveal the unlikely birth of a literary and satirical talent, a prisoner turned writer in the crucible of death. Ziewulska's camp creations affirm art to have been, for some prisoners at least, a fundamental aspect of their humanity, a natural means to satisfy the life of the mind or comfort the heart. In most cases, Ziewulska's creative process relies on something called parody song, taking a pre-existing melody and setting a new text to it, which is by far the fastest means of generating a new musical work. But in other instances, she plays the folk poet, responding spontaneously to the perverted system of the camp out of an inner need to bear witness. Still at other times, her work is outwardly directed. It serves to distract, console, or cheer her fellow inmates by retaining a measure of normalcy. Today, I'll focus on 3 examples that demonstrate the ways in which Ziewulska adjusted imaginatively, poetically, generously, and even philosophically to the changing needs of her camp environment. Krystyna Ziewulska was born Sonia Landau in Łódź, Poland on September 1st, 1914. Raised in an atmosphere shared by many urban Polish-speaking assimilated Jews, Ziewulska's upbringing was decidedly secular. Though the family preserved some familial traditions around the Jewish holidays, they did not attend services at synagogue or keep kosher. There was family music making. Ziewulska's mother sang beautifully while her father played mandolin. At times, Ziewulska would join them improvising at the piano. Later in life, she described these musical moments as her fondest memories. Ziewulska considered herself a communist, less perhaps out of conviction than a desire to be in step with the predominant political orientation of Łódź's youth in the interwar period. As she explained in an interview with historian Barbara Engelking, demonstrating her characteristic wit, quote, "I was the sort of communist who thought, for example, that if my stockings sag around the ankles, then I'm a real big communist. The more dirty and unkempt, the better a communist I am. When Bolek, her fiance, came into my life and brought me 3 pairs of silk stockings, Something in me broke. He said, "You'll see. When you put them on, if you don't like them, you won't wear them." I had rather nice legs. I put those stockings on and looked at them and thought, "Oh, damn," end quote. In 1938, after completing a Polish language Jewish gymnasium in Łódź, Przewódzka began her law studies in Warsaw. A year later, Germany invaded Poland, and Przewódzka retreated to Łódź to be with her father, mother, and younger sister, Basia. As the Nazi persecution of Jews in Łódź grew more violent following the city's incorporation into the Third Reich, Przewódzka returned to Warsaw, hoping to arrange documents that would prevent her family's relocation to the Łódź ghetto. Though her attempts to help them failed, they somehow managed to get out, making their way to Warsaw, where they were eventually relocated to the ghetto there in 1941. Weighing the chance of survival against the certainty of deportation or death by starvation, Przewódzka daringly walked out of the ghetto with her mother in broad daylight on August 26, 1942. By that time, her sister was already on the Aryan side. Her father she had left behind so as to have a better chance of survival, a decision that tormented her until her dying day. And some 20 years later, in 1963, Przewódzka published her account of the Warsaw Ghetto in part to address the burden of guilt she felt for abandoning her father. On the Aryan side, Przewódzka assumed different identities and joined the Polish resistance. Eventually, as Zosia Wiśniewska, she provided aid to Jews in hiding by counterfeiting identity cards and other documents with a Polish Catholic friend also named Zosia, a beautiful brunette who would later be sent with her to Birkenau. To the Nazi authorities who sought Przewódzka's capture, she was known only as the blonde Zosia. June 21st, 1943, she was arrested and taken to the infamous Gestapo headquarters on Schucha Avenue in Warsaw. Under interrogation, she assumed the fictitious identity of Krystyna Przewódzka so as not to implicate her fellow conspirators. From Schucha, she was transported to Pawiak prison, also in Warsaw, then 2 months later to Auschwitz-Birkenau. She was registered in the camp on August 23, 1943, as a Polish political prisoner, number 55,908. Though according to her own account in Przeżyłam Oświęcim, she had never before written poetry, in Birkenau, Przewódzka began creating verses, at first in order to endure the endless roll calls to which prisoners were subjected. Fellow inmates, eager to learn her poems, memorized and disseminated them beyond an immediate circle of friends. From among the many accounts that corroborate the impact of Przewódzka's creations, actress Maria Zarembinska, a fellow survivor, writing in November of 1945, recalled, quote, "Krystyna's poems became very popular. They were recited everywhere, literally during every free moment, in the latrine, while digging ditches, during return marches from the fields, but naturally only when the authorities weren't close by, and in her bunks, and in the evening when it seemed that a person was already so dreadfully tired, and all she could do was collapse stone heavy and fall asleep. Even then, whenever it happened that a new verse came, you lifted your head, the tiredness flew away, and you listened or you copied the poem down." Among the most popular was Wymarsz przez bramę, March Out Through the Gate, which first sarcastically records the reality of marching out to labor details beyond the camp, and then calls on her fellow inmates to persevere, presenting them with a vision of Liberation Day, when she and her comrades will finally have a chance to take revenge. It's a powerful, empowering poem, and it's easy to understand why so many women would have risked their lives to recite or write it down, including Zarembinska. It does nothing less than cunningly usurps control of the Nazis' very own sadistic, ubiquitous, deafening march to deliver a potent message of revenge. But Wymarsz could not have been written were it not for an earlier poem Przewódzka created, the one which actually saved her life. And this poem is called Apel Poranne, or morning roll call, and I'll read it to you if you allow. Over Auschwitz, the sun rises, bright pink streaks across the sky. We stand in a row, young and old, while the stars above expire. All of us stand for the morning roll call every day, whether it's fair or foul. And one can see on the faces of many only pain, longing, and despair. For maybe now, in this hazy hour, at home a child is crying. Maybe my mama is thinking of me. Will I see her ever again? It's sweet to imagine that maybe now my beloved thinks about me. But what if, good God forbid, instead they have come for him? While the action splendidly continues as if at a filming session, not far at path's intersection, someone arrives by stagecoach. They dismount with grace, slowly. Azure auf Herren. We transform into pillars of salt, into nothing, nonsense, numbers. Then they count us with proud contempt, they of the higher race. They are the German avant-garde. They count the cattle in stripes. Suddenly you tremble as if shocked by a current, and your mind lights up like a flare. After all, that's also a mother or a wife, a woman, and I, a woman. Slowly unfolds the sensational film. Attention, fall into line ahead. And the ultra culminating moment, the camp commandant arrives. Can it be the world is so vile? A whistle and a moment's silence. In our souls, we deliver fervent prayers. Is there someone who will hear us? The sun now rises higher, bright pink streaks across the sky. God, we beg of you so. Is it truly not much longer to go? A well-positioned prisoner named Vala, Valentina Konopska, one of the earliest women to be sent to Auschwitz, actually, heard the poem and so struck by its honesty and insight, sought out its author, offering protection to a near-death Przewalska by placing her in the sauna, the central shower and disinfecting building, where she registered prisoners. This was a coveted indoor work detail, but Przewalska soon fell sick with typhus and found herself in the camp hospital. Once more, Vala intervened, giving her illegally obtained medicine that all but ensured her survival. In a questionnaire returned to the journalist Alexander Kulishevich in 1965, Przewalska explained, quote, "If I survived typhus, it was only thanks to an injection I alone received in the barrack during my night of crisis. Vala Konopska obtained the heart injection, and it was determined that I, as the quote-unquote camp poet, would get it," end quote. By that time, Vala, who worked in the office of the camp Gestapo, knew Przewalska was Jewish. The camp command had called Przewalska in for questioning during the first phase of her illness. Vala had already risked her life to save a small handful of other Jewish women, but in this case, she was especially determined to save her camp poet, conspiring with a fellow worker to destroy Przewalska's interrogation records. And the dominant Polish resistance movement during the war, known as the Home Army, also had an underground network that operated in the camp, of which Vala was a part. As a gesture of gratitude, Przewalska wrote Vala a poem and enlisted the help of another talented prisoner to illustrate it in the form of a tiny booklet that she offered Vala as a memento on December 2nd, 1943. And I'll just have all of you know, you're the very first audience, actually, besides Vala's family and myself, to see this poem that Przewalska penned for her beloved friend Vala. I'll say that in 2016, while I was living in Germany for the semester, I learned that Vala's younger sister was still alive and living in Warsaw, and so I hopped on a plane to meet her, and she shared with me details of Vala's life and a number of keepsakes that Vala had managed to smuggle out of the camp. It's its own separate, really remarkable story. So let me share with you this little tiny booklet, and I'll say it's really only in actuality about 3.5 inches large by 3.5 by 4 So it's a very tiny little thing that she tucked inside of her camp uniform and smuggled out of the camp, with a number of typed poems by Jabulska also folded into this tiny little rectangle. And so that as the sheets were unfolded, you can actually see how she carefully preserved these poems that she treasured. So this is the cover, tied, as you can see, with a leather strap, all things very difficult to obtain, you can imagine. The back cover with a heart and the date that it was created for Vala. And it's called, Wali in Polish is just for Vala. And this is just a quick, rough translation of what you see here. For some time now, all I hear is this: "Oh, ma'am, you have it good after all, Vala." You know, ma'am, I have I can't actually read. What does it say here? Hold on. Oops, sorry. I'll let you read this part yourself, actually, because I can't actually see it very well. She knows German well. Maybe you know of a job after all, Vala. Excuse me for asking such a thing, but I look so unkempt. Should you get hold of an old dress after all, Vala? My brother is next door in the next barrack. I don't know his camp number. If you'd be so kind, could you please ask Vala? And as you can imagine, it goes on and on. My mother, my grandmother, my sister, they're all sick. Can you get some medicine? Do you know when the war will end? Vala has a good position. Maybe ask Vala. And then Vala, she walks around essentially trying to, meet everyone's needs and wishes, with a gate holding back everybody else's requests. For everyone, she takes the time to find warm underwear, to find a shot, a medicine, to find news, to find a special job. My dearest Vala, I write this little poem and wonder how to make a wish for someone to whom you owe your life. May all of your dreams of freedom finally come true. May you always live in an atmosphere of warmth and affection. And once in Warsaw, may they say, as I've often dreamed they may, please take care of this for me. After all, ma'am, Krisha, meaning the little name for Kristina. After Jabulska survived the worst of her illness and was released from the hospital in February 1944, Vala placed her in the Effektenkammer Commando. There, her poet for the time being would continue to write. Work in the Effektenkammer, a storage facility for the personal effects confiscated from arriving political prisoners, was considered among the best in the camp. Prisoners assigned to this type of labor squad were safeguarded against harsh physical work details and had ample opportunity to illegally obtain food, clothing, and other valuables. After April of 1944, when they were relocated to a more remote sector of the camp, where they lived together in less crowded barracks, were allowed to wear civilian clothes and were released from both roll calls and selections. Yet for all of their privileges, the Effektenkammer workers located directly adjacent to crematorium number 4 could not escape the sight, screams, and stench of the relentless daily mass killings taking place just a few yards away. Jabulska also couldn't escape the constant fear of her Jewish identity being discovered by her fellow inmates. Though this mattered none to Vala, it was not at all clear to Jabulska that her fellow workers in the Effektenkammer Commando would be as sympathetic. As Jabulska recalls, quote, I was afraid. I was not only a Jew, but then I was also a communist. Nothing could be worse, right? And all my girlfriends were from the home army resistance. I thought they knew that I'm a Pole and that they didn't know that I'm a Jew. Oh, that fear made me take care that no one would know, end quote. Lifelong friend and fellow survivor Wanda Marosani states that already in the camp, she knew Jabulska was Sonia Landau. But in the camp, such things had absolutely no meaning among girlfriends. Edwarda Powicki, who worked with Jabulska in the Effektenkammer, also claims she knew somehow that Jabulska was Jewish, but that such distinctions among girlfriends did not matter at all. Often it would be around the holidays when you would sing Christmas carols, and you would see that some prisoners knew all of the words and were able to sing and others didn't. Another former prisoner in a different case was telling me about how that often was kind of a telling reveal about someone's concealed identity. Powicka also added that no one spoke about one's reasons for imprisonment because there was also the fear that somebody might be an informant. Clearly, for everyone involved, there was a great deal of risk associated with Przewalski's identity. Otherwise, Przewalski's girlfriend certainly would have let her know that she had nothing to fear, that her secret was safe with them. But for Przewalski, there was also the impossible condition of witnessing the mass murder of fellow Jews at close range, and the private fear of being found out to be one of them, a double horror shared by only a small number of other Jewish inmates who had found themselves in the same situation. Przewalski tried to adjust to her new life in the Effektenkammer by throwing herself into resistance activities and making herself as useful as possible, no doubt out of an inner turmoil of helplessness, guilt, humanity, and likely also self-protection. Having ready access to valuable goods, and with German asocial inmates occasionally being released from the camp after short periods of internment, she soon joined an underground network of prisoners who worked to disseminate items and information. Together, they smuggled medicines into the camp hospital and news of mass killings out of the camp through the quote-unquote sewn post, instructing those released to mail letters that had been stitched into the hemlines of their dresses to the radio BBC. And urged by her friends, Przewalski wrote more verses, afforded the time and space to do so by her friend Nella, who shielded her at her desk and carried out Przewalski's accounting duties for her so as not to arouse suspicions. As Nella entered the names of the dead on the Namenskartei, Przewalski created her poem Brzeziński in May of 1944. Structured as a light, flirtatious conversation between two inmates made perverse by its dark, improbable context, Brzeziński captures the conflict between a longing to give in to human passion and a moral apprehension to do so in the face of murder. It reflects on the cruel paradox of living in the midst of a systemized death factory, where one could, it seems, be at most half alive at any given time, either in the flesh or in one's soul, but never both. And this is Brzezinski. A small real woodland and authentic spruce trees, this place is referred to by the sweet name Brzezinki. It's hardly any different than before the winds of war. It's hardly less inhabited and silent evermore. At one time, there were fields here filled with yellow lupins. To make it more pastoral, now there are many chimneys. At one time, there were stables, peasant huts, and forests. Now the sauna, barracks, and prisoners in stripes. At one time, flowers bloomed here. There were geese and chickens too. Today, flowers also bloom, those of Hitlerite culture. At one time, the earth was fragrant and grain rustled in the wind. But someone changed all of that. Someone was in a good mood. Music plays from the radio in the servants' room of the boss. You can listen to the melody of a pleasant little waltz. This too shall pass, an end will come one day, and after every December again follows May. One might go for a walk, but the barbed wire's in the way, so instead one turns about like a beast within a cage. Madam, it's so warm outside, the weather is so fair, the sky is starry up above, and you and I so young. But please don't pull away, you must surely understand, already for so long I've not been close to anyone. Where exactly are you from, madam? Everyone here wants to know. I arrived by transport from Warsaw 2 years ago. A house and garden remain there, I have a child and wife at home. But that is so far away, and I fear that it is gone. Please at least give a smile. Even here sometimes the sun shines. Honestly, is there nothing that within you, madam, stirs? Music plays from afar. It's warm, nice. Oh, paradise. Why do you run away, madam? Es geht alles vorbei. Sir, I also see this sparkling skylit night. Only what is that smoke? Nothing, just some burning rags. Sir, and within me spring awakens. Only what's that chimney? Oh, there, nothing, they burn people. Sir, I too feel just like other women. Only what's that procession? Nothing, living skeletons. Sir, I also have longing. Please, sir, believe me. But there near the barrack, what's that? Nothing, just a corpse. Sir, I certainly do know that I am still quite young, and that's why I'm forlorn and feel so much regret. I didn't think that someday I would see such things as these, but no, not at all, sir. Honestly, I'm not crying. And the little waltz still sounds. It smells of spring. It's May. With a sweet voice, someone sings, an end will come one day. The ambivalence of this scene, these emotions, are essentialized in the immensely popular wartime waltz song, Es geht alles vorüber, the jaunty refrain of which Przewalska quotes in stanzas 8 and motivically returns to in stanzas 15 and 22. And I'll play a little fragment of Es geht alles vorüber so that you can hear how really jaunty it is and how it would have become such an immensely popular waltz during wartime. It was performed first to great popularity by Lala Anderson. The music itself is by Fred Raymond. And here is a brief translation of the German.
Auf Kosten in einsamer Nacht, da steht ein Soldat und hält Wacht, träumt von Hanne und dem Glück, das zu Hause blieb zurück. Die Wolken am Himmel, sie ziehen ja alle zur Heimat dahin, und sein Herz, das denkt ganz still für sich, dahin ziehe einmal auch ich. Es geht alles vorüber, es geht alles vorbei. Auf jeden Dezember folgt wieder ein Mai. Es geht alles vorüber, es geht alles vorbei. Doch zwei, die sich lieben, die bleiben sich treu.
Okay.
Und als sie voll Sehnsucht ihn
I'm going to
rief,
stop it there.
da schrieb ihr gleich einen Brief. Liebe Hanne, bleib mir gut und verliere nicht den Mut. Denn gibt es auch Zunder und Dreck, das alle...
Okay. Sorry for the for the little snafu. It always happens, doesn't it? Let me just get back to now. In Przewalska's poem, the song Drifting from the Radio encourages holding on, blithely promises an end, but it could just as easily be offering forgiveness and consent. While the female prisoner struggles not to deaden herself to her surroundings, the desire to do so is great. The man and the music call her away, urge her to escape, if only for a moment, to be blind to the senseless death of others all around. In her poem, Przewalska evokes a sensory swirl of scent, sounds, and night setting that are near perfect for romance, but the landscape eerily intrudes to remind the woman of where she is and why. Though Przewalska did not consciously intend for her poem to be a parody song, its verses scan well to the music of Es geht alles vorüber, explaining why her fellow inmates, no doubt prompted by the direct quotation of the song's refrain, preferred to sing it to Fred Raymond's tune rather than merely recite it. As they did so, no doubt many realized that Brzezinski gave voice to the emotional and moral confusion that arose from Przewózka's relationship with a Polish political prisoner named Wacław Wacek Litz, who worked in the men's Effektenkammer located adjacent to the women's Effektenkammer barracks. In the first edition of her memoir, I Survived Auschwitz, Przewózka offhandedly identifies Wacek as a speckled doctor from Warsaw interested in her poetry, and suggests they shared mutual understanding, compassion, optimism, and a desire to provide aid to fellow inmates. Reading her account of those first weeks in Brzezinki, depicted as they are in fragmentary dialogue and clipped scenes that are meant to evoke an undescribable, incomprehensible whole, it's easy to miss the sustained, more intimate relationship the two inmates had. Nonetheless, one description in I Survived Auschwitz, echoing a number of details in the poem, makes clear that the woman in Przewózka's poem could only be Przewózka herself. Krysza, I heard a deep whisper in the dark. It was Wacek. After a moment's hesitation, I leapt into the dark area between the barracks. I'm sorry to expose you to danger, but you understand, don't you? I understand, the moon. Yes, and so many stars. And everything is forbidden. I'm getting claustrophobia. There are more transports coming. Do they want to burn the whole world, Krysza? Someone was approaching. We clung to the wall, flattening our arms against the side of the barrack as if we were supporting it. The torch light searched in our direction and falling behind us, slipped down and moved on. Bedarf is on duty tonight. You must go. Wait till he gets a little further, Wacek cautioned. We waited in silence. Your heart is beating fast. I'm sorry, Krysza. I'm a little excited. Listen, I must kiss you. I must. I can't stand it any longer. He pulled me toward him. For one short moment, I seemed to be whirling somewhere among the stars. Whose bucket is this? Someone shouted from the well. Mine. I ran and picked up my bucket. In my hurry, I spilled half the water. The gates closed behind me. I just made it. End quote. Later in life, after earlier editions of I Survived Auschwitz were long out of print and forgotten, Przewózka remained reluctant to candidly reveal that Wacek had been her camp romance, no doubt fearing she would be unable to capture the delicacy of the situation with the distance of time. It was only her camp friends who decades later all blushingly confided the truth to me. An irrepressibly passionate woman, Przewózka confronted the ephemeral, contingent nature of life at Birkenau and determined to live in the moment and to the fullest while she still could. On the morning of January 18th, 1945, Przewózka packed a knapsack with provisions, ate one last meal with some of her girlfriends, put on warm clothing, and excitedly awaited instructions for evacuation, certain that the Soviets would arrive at any moment to liberate them. They did not. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the women of the Effektenkammer Commando were instead marched out of the camp, joining some 60,000 other prisoners from Auschwitz in its subcamps who were forced westward. After about 5 miles, and an ever greater realization that endurance would be essential if they were to reach their unknown destination alive, Przewózka ditched her pack, keeping only the camp notebook that had been given to her a year earlier by her closest friend, Basia Biederman. In her notebook, Przewózka hastily wrote in pen, "Please, should someone find this, look for Dr. Stanisław Szednicki in Pruszków and give it to him with the request that he pass it on to my mother, previous address, so forth and so on." And then, in a rash moment, Przewózka grabbed her friends Basia and Zosia and made for an overturned hay cart in the middle of the road. Around them stretched empty frozen fields. Behind them and up ahead dragged an endless procession of prisoners and Nazi guards. In her diary, she scribbled the events as they had unfolded. Barely out of view in the chaotic center of it all, Przewózka, it would seem, was spared death by sheer luck alone. Once the columns moved away, she ran to the nearest village some 2 kilometers away. She could still hear shots, shouting, and dogs in the pitch black distance when she knocked at the first door she came to in the village. No one responded, likely out of fear. At the next house, a young man with a wife and small child, though visibly terrified, provided shelter and nourishment nonetheless. Accustomed to processing trauma in words, There, she immediately recorded her emotions with honesty and poignancy, writing quickly so as not to forget. 5 days later, in pencil in a much steadier hand, quote, Tuesday, I'm writing out of boredom, anxiousness, and to better remember. I came Thursday at night. The man of the house is an organist, a wonderful person. He understands this as his duty, is proud he can help. He took me down from the attic. They fed me meat, potatoes, coffee with milk. They are genuine, kind, listen as I tell them, sympathize. Apparently many were shot in this area. In the Pshtinov woods, piles of corpses. Only those who ran away will survive. I'm thinking of my dear Basha. Did she have the same luck as I? Did she not freeze to death? Did she not get the butt of a rifle to the head? Poor thing, who will I find and where? This will be a new test of strength, but it's one I'm not afraid of. Apparently, they've declared Poland's independence. It's hard to believe it. I don't know how to be happy. I'm shaken up. We waited so long for this moment through such torment, but now that it's come, I have to think about those who died in this last, most tragic march, the crowning moment of all our suffering. I'm thinking of writing a poem about this. Maybe that will help ease things. I often treat writing poems as solving charades. You kill time with mental puzzles. It's just that this topic is still so raw, still so very painful, end quote. In a stream of consciousness, she continues speaking to her diary as if to a friend, of wanting to see her mother, her fear that her camp friends with whom she endured so much suffering may have senselessly, stupidly died just ahead of the front. She wonders what her life will be like now, whom she should be, how she'll make money to feed herself and care for her mother. She vacillates between belief and cynicism. She remembers her friends last seen in the ghetto. She thinks about her relationships with men, who she really loves, who she might marry, who she must forget. She is, after all, a 30-year-old woman on the verge of beginning life anew. Ultimately, she grapples with the deepest questions of future identity as a communist, a Jew, a Pole, a woman, a writer. Quote, what role will we play? After all, they don't want us. Maybe emigration and that beloved nostalgia for the fatherland? then at will, you can challenge things in literary fashion. You're not cursed. You don't have to be ashamed of anything and explain anything to anyone. Oh, I'm so world-wise, it frightens me. One and the other I both love and I hate. I don't know how to determine where the lying ends and the truth begins. And if I wanted to live by the truth alone and not suffer from it, is that even possible? I want everything to have meaning, but what kind? Life is so short, so many years wasted. I need to thoughtfully and purposefully take advantage of what's left. After all of this, I wouldn't know how to live a single day of my life absent-mindedly, playing it safe, lying, being servile. But will conditions allow one to be oneself? And what does that mean, to be oneself? I don't want to just live passively. I want to shape the unknown as I choose. Will I succeed? And maybe I'll have a child with Bolek. Mama would certainly want that. After all, if we both survive, we have to be together. But will there be any resignation in this? Maybe it will turn out that I haven't really changed as much as I imagine. I'm concerned that my girlfriend comrades needlessly built confidence in me without reason to. After all, there can't be talk about any sort of talent. I'll tell what I know to somebody who wants to listen, and I'll write little verses for my own children. And Bolek will be happy. But what if he's with someone and he just feels obligated to me and Mama? Maybe he thinks he has to wait for me. And Vatsek, what will I do with him if he shows up? Silence, the ticking of a clock. Maybe I'll tell him the truth. He understands so much after all. He'll certainly understand me. Then we'll see. May he only survive. Maybe I'll be able to find his mother. If only I had money, I could go everywhere and see and tell everyone. I know that I am one of a very few who will come out of this healthy. Precisely I, the biggest slap to Hitler's face, end quote. On January 27th, Auschwitz is finally liberated. That evening, Jaworska records her last diary entry, end quote. Saturday, We did not get ready for bed this evening. We are under artillery fire. The children were led to the basement. The owner can't fathom how I'm not scared. How could I possibly be scared after all the dangers I've faced? In light of my experiences and these miracles that happened to me, I'm beginning to have faith. I'm beginning to think about some other sort of connection with God than the one I've had until now. Zosha would call me the Catholic she wished me to be. It seems to me that I will not have peace until I kneel down in church and thank her and God for saving me. I know so many contradictions within me. On the one hand, I want the changes that are coming from the East, and I'm aware that religion poorly understood makes you stupid. On the other hand, these mystical feelings of mine, never perhaps have I thought so much. By tomorrow, the Germans will most certainly run away. End quote. Przewalska's writing trails off illegibly. Somewhere along the road between Auschwitz and the German interior, Basha Biederman and Zosha, with whom Przewalska first set out of the camp, make it. Tupta, with Dancing Chesha and their friend Lodja, also survive. Her camp love Wacek, too, lives to return home to Warsaw. And Vala, Przewalska's protector, she too escapes the death march a couple of days after Przewalska. And after 5 long years in Auschwitz, she too experiences the joy of liberation. But severely weakened by the effort, she dies of tuberculosis by the end of her first summer of freedom. The penicillin that likely would have saved her life arrived just a few weeks too late. Sonia Landau also does not survive. She remains permanently buried in the past, in wartime, on the other side of liberation. Krystyna Przewalska instead lives on. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. There may be a few questions.
Hi, yes, this is Marissa Hollywood, the Associate Director, as the disembodied voice that's speaking. We do have a couple of questions for the audience. Maybe we could just start with that. Lucille asks, is there one or more books that feature her writings that are available?
Yes. Sorry, I just was about to lose battery. All sorts of snafus. That would have been terrible. So you can certainly get a hold of her I Survived Auschwitz, but also her memoirs of her time in the Warsaw Ghetto were published in English translation, and the English title is called Empty Water. Besides that, none of her poems have made it yet into publication. This is something that that I hope will come about once I'm finished with my book, and we'll be able to share that with the world. I know of about 30 or so poems, and finding this little booklet that she gave to Vala was a real surprise. But those are the only 2 publications that are published in English translation. There are a couple of other journal articles. She also wrote many pieces as a journalist, commenting on various cultural events in Poland, but they're all in Polish, and you'd have to search for them. I hope that helps answer.
Wonderful, thank you. And you can always, Dr. Milewski, if you want to type any links to any of those works that you mentioned, we can put them in the chat for people if it's easier to find.
Right.
We have a couple more questions. I'm going to go with this one from Judy. What do you know of her life after Auschwitz?
Oh, that's that's a whole other chapter. It's classic, and one has to understand just how profoundly complicated everything was after the war in Poland. She returned to Łódź since Warsaw was destroyed. She found her mother with Bolek. They had survived in Vienna, actually, on false papers. They survived as essentially Polish slave workers, and returned to be reunited. Interestingly, another man, Leon Andrzejewski, who was absolutely infatuated with Przewalska before the war, and they had dated in Łódź when they were teenagers. He returned after surviving in the East. He was a diehard communist. He returned with the sort of the front guard as a member of the NKVD, the communist secret police, the Soviet secret police. He was installed into a very, very prominent position and was charged with essentially creating the lists of the people who would be murdered who had participated in the Home Army, so Polish patriots. He returned back and said that he would kill himself if Przewalska didn't marry him. That the only reason he had survived imprisonment as a communist and the only thing that kept him alive during the war was the possibility of seeing her again. In classic Przewalska fashion, she said, "I don't know what to do. I'm supposed to marry Bolek." And Bolek said, "Listen, you've already been my wife. Go ahead and marry Leon." So she married Leon. She was already pregnant with Bolek's son. She married Leon probably in in an important way, trying to secure protection for herself, for her mother, as a way of realizing that with Leon connected to the Communist Party and that prominent, that they would be given access to things that could help her friends and she could repay some of her debts. And she did, in fact. As it turned out, a number of her friends from the Effektenkammer and from the camp had family members rounded up and imprisoned and were slotted to be shot by the NKVD as traitors to the nation. And because of her friendship with these family members, she was able to save a number of family members of her friends who had been with her at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The marriage obviously didn't last. She had a number of affairs with remarkable characters. Again, too much to go into. Eventually, during the March 68 Jewish purges that happened when Polish communists were trying to consolidate political power yet again, one of her sons decided it would be an opportunity to leave for the West finally and went to the Netherlands. The other son, who actually was targeted with anti-Semitic smears while he was still in art school, followed his brother. And his mom basically, their mom said, Przewalska said, "Look, I have nobody here. I may as well go, but I don't know Dutch and I'm not going to learn a new language. And so I'll meet you in Germany. I have some friends in Dusseldorf." And so she moved to Dusseldorf, and that is where she died. Sorry, I left out a lot, believe it or not.
Thank you so much. So I think what we'll do is we'll take one more audience question. I think it's a really good one. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Dalkey in case he has any questions for you. This question comes from Kitty Bateman. Hi, Kitty. How did you first become interested in this poet? And I'm going to add on to this. I'm very curious. How did you acquire access to her archive of materials?
So that's a great question. When I was still a graduate student, and the museum the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. had not yet been built. I was told by a professor of mine that the museum was desperately in need of Polish translators, people with Polish language skills. I grew up bilingual. My own parents are refugees. And so I went to Washington and offered my services. As it turns out, again, sort of a lucky stroke, the museum had just acquired this enormous collection called the Alexander Kulishevich Collection of concentration camp songs and poetry, all in Polish, all unknown. He had worked in obscurity for the most part in Poland, although he did have a concertizing life in Germany in the post-war period. And so they put me on the task of creating an English language catalog to the collection. And I did that over the course of several years, working in the summers and during, all of my sort of academic breaks while I was a PhD student. And it was in those materials that I first learned of Przewólska. And Kulishevich and Przewólska had a marvelously long correspondence. She was incredibly thoughtful. She was one of the few people who really understood how unhinged he was and didn't hold it against him. A lot of former prisoners, survivors, saw Kulishevich's mania as a form of psychological illness. She was much more sympathetic to what he was trying to do and was very gracious about sharing a lot of her life with him in these letters. And that's how I actually found out about these other friends of hers from the Effektenkammer Commando through the correspondence in the collection. I found telephone numbers, names, and when I went to Poland on my Fulbright, I just started trying the numbers and found that a lot of these octogenarians and nonagenarians were still alive. And then just did everything I could to, sort of follow the leads and interview whoever was still alive and could tell me more information to fill out the sort of complexities of the stories. And so I was hooked. Her story's provocative and interesting. Then I'm not even sure exactly how. Once I did so many different trips to Poland over the years, I found out that her son, the artist, had resettled in Warsaw, and that he was obviously alive and willing to talk to me. And so he also gave me an enormous amount of access to family members and other friends who could fill out yet more of the story. And people started sharing their mementos, and this is the story that I've been able to cobble together from those years of tracking down survivors and relations and friends. I don't know if that helps.
That's a wonderful answer. Katie commented back, thank you so much. It was wonderfully interesting and so well done. And, thank you for keeping her memory alive, because those papers could have really been buried in that archive, as we well know. So I'm sure somewhere she and I'm sure her whole family are very grateful to you for all of your work.
Well, it is the only thing that I really want to finish before I get to retire. I just have come to love my subjects very much, and I feel like I owe them and their families my time and my care.
Thank you. So before we turn it over to Dr. Cohen to wrap up the event, Dr. Dalkey, do you have any questions or comments that you have for Dr. Milewski?
Just briefly, and feel free to not answer. There is something special about performance, bringing to life the viewpoint of another through music. And I'm aware of your interest in the music of Chopin. And so I was wondering, do you by any chance have an instrument that you enjoy playing, even if just informally?
I actually am a singer and love singing. And I was never trained as a singer. I was always involved in choir singing. I started out in a church choir and went on to sing in musicals. And by the time I got to college, I became part of this elite chamber choir. And I still enjoy singing, much to the chagrin of my family members, who all do not like to sing and hate when I sing. But I love it, and I do it whenever I can. And I think that's why this particular form of music really resonates with me, because it's just so immediate and so human and so elemental and utilitarian. It's the stuff that we all really can connect to. Of course, I adore Chopin. I adore classical music very much, of all sorts and flavors. But songs, simple songs, really have an elemental place in my heart, because that's really my background. I didn't grow up listening to classical music. I had only heard of the great Chopin. I grew up in a refugee family, and so we were very poor. and I had few opportunities before I got to college. So somehow tapping into this repertoire in particular really speaks to my heart and to my own kind of identity of always having needed music without any kind of substantial training of the sort that obviously you, Stephen, have, and so many of my peers and colleagues do, and even my students are better trained singers and pianists. So yeah, I love musical performance, and it very much has always been my go-to escape during moments of challenge. And so I get it. I think it's really easy for us to understand that, even maybe if we aren't ourselves music performers.
That's wonderful to hear. And it was going to be a second part of my question, how any music making that you do informs your scholarship. And you said that so beautifully.
Oh, well, it really, I just find that studying songs of this nature really give us a very easy entry point in the classroom too with students. And it's very leveling, and everyone can feel like they understand this because it's so fundamental. I don't have to get into jargon and worry about theory and explaining what's happening harmonically. We really just do a lot of what I find to be the most interesting thing about parody songs, which is we do a lot of side-by-side comparisons of the original source material and then the version that was created in the camp, because I find that dialogue between the original lyrics, the original text, and the text created in the camp to often be in dialogue with each other in really kind of interesting ways. As you saw even with Brzezinski, right? And the way that she folds in Es geht alles vorüber, right? She herself is just, she had such an ear. To hear her poems recited in Polish, you get a real sense of their melodiousness. She was incredibly she has a really good ear. And so it shouldn't surprise, and it doesn't surprise me that so much of her poetry either lent itself to music in order for other prisoners to remember it, or she herself folded in references to music to give us an orientation about the kind of topics she was thinking about.
That gives you so much to think about. You mentioned dialogue and you mentioned leveling. Deep from the past and in the midst of generalizations that we all have about cruelty and oppression in the past, Christina, I try to do the accents correctly, Christina rises up through the specificity that you give her to the level where we are now so that we can interact and understand more. So thank you. Thank you very much for these answers. It gives you so much to think about.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. And I really am so grateful to always have a chance to talk about Krystyna Ziewulska and her remarkable life, and the connections that she was able to make. She's extraordinary. And I also feel very strongly about especially the whole sort of community of friends that she had in the post-war period. I think as a musicologist, obviously I'm interested in the music, but as a more general historian, I feel like she's one of those stories that tends to fall on the cracks, fall between the cracks in terms of Holocaust narratives. There is the more well-known narrative of survival and then emigration, right? Either to Israel mostly or to the United States or other parts of Europe. It's completely understandable that was really a very prominent type of reaction to the chaos of Poland in the post-war period. But that she stayed and somehow tried to sort of keep playing this balancing act of being at once, as she writes already in her memoirs, while she's waiting for liberation, trying to balance her identities of being a Pole and being a Jew, being a communist, trying to sort of understand what her authentic self is and finding a way to reconcile all of those identities in one. She's really complicated. And when I started trying to find out more about her life, it led me to pathways where I met more Polish Jews of that sort, who against sort of the trend, if you will, against the majority, decided to somehow make their lives at home in Poland, and we've forgotten about them. And I feel a debt of service to them as well. I think their stories are super complicated, and they allow us very importantly for me, they allow us an entree into reconciliation, to trying to understand where the betrayals were and where the friendships were, where we could find a way of getting beyond the narratives that keep Poles and Jews today divided. It's really, really important to my spirit, as someone who, as a Polish American, has always had to navigate two separate identities. It's sort of an identity that it's not the same, obviously, and certainly not as tragic. But I understand that liminal space really well. And that's, I think, why I'm so drawn to her story and the complications of it. It's not an easy one to tell.
No, and I bet, if I may, you are not alone. I feel there are many of us who find in some way that they were in between one camp or the other, or trying to navigate how to fit in. And as you say, reconcile. I want to say thanks again, and it's very good to see you, and we're so grateful here at Queensborough and at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center. I want to turn it over now to Dr. Cohen. It may be about time for us to say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Belusky, and thank you so much, Dr. Dalkey. I want to say that to your point about looking at narratives, that it's very important to be able to talk about the complexity. And the other thing that really struck me was, how do we inject humanity into this conversation, and moments of survival and ways to hold on to hope when it feels and often is hopeless in the case of Auschwitz, but especially when we're at a point in our own culture where each of us has overlapping identities and ways that we connect to each other. And especially as the history and memory of the Holocaust, we move from, it's now 70, 80, 90, at some point, what will be really important is for young people to find their way through this. And I think it's through these connections and connecting to different points of the story, I think is going to be really important for them. It's not just enough to say how many people died and where that happened. I think that the humanity part of this conversation is really critical. And so I want to thank you both for your presentation, and thanks to everyone who joined the conversation today. We're really, really pleased to not only host this as the first event in our NEH series, but also wanted to mention that we've put in the chat more information about our upcoming, or actually not upcoming, our current brand new exhibition on the Nazi concentration camp system, which is very important, gets into a lot of these kinds of nuances. And we think that you'll find it very interesting. It's completely virtual. You'll find text, imagery, videos, and additional resources. On behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, Queensborough Community College, thank you all, and please be well and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was really lovely to be with all of you.
We're very grateful.
We are too, and you're welcome.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye now. Thank
Bye.
you again.